Welcome everyone. My name is Angel Starks and I am the Developer Academy Manager, and I am elated for all of you to be here. This is our last deep dive of 2022 and we're super excited because we have some good topics in store for 2023. The responses this year have been fantastic, and we look forward to growing together and then also providing these opportunities continuously through our programming. I will be quick because we have a great content today. I work for an organization called Spark. Our mission is to focus on areas that have been historically disinvested and to bring light and love and actively pursue the ability to bring that community aspect to those areas. And we do that through real estate development. Our Developer Academy provides opportunities for emerging leaders to access to technical assistance, an in-depth class that happens twice a year. And we have some great partners, which I see some of our instructors are on this call or this session with the National Development Council and Freddie Mac. And we also have our Tulsa network here as well. So we're super excited to have them on board and experiencing this with us. Just a quick shout out on some of the other sponsors that we've had. And we want to ensure that we thank them because we aren't able to do any of our programming without. So today's session is actually led by a wonderful organization, and I would not be doing it justice. And we have a wonderful, great speaker today, Mary Ewer, who is going to lead us through building resilient homes and all of the aspects of what that might look like. Now, she did warn us that there is going to be some group conversation or some interaction. So Mary, I am going to turn it over to you. Please introduce yourself and I will switch it over to make host. Now, I do know that there's people still attending, so if it gets too much, then you just let me know, and then we can kind of work together and tag team. Now, perfect. Individuals that don't want to speak, I am here for you. I will look in the chat. Feel free to put your messages or questions in the chat, or also use any of the Zoom features, raising your hand. But we do ask that you stay on mute so that we can make sure that everybody can hear our guest speaker. Mary, are you okay?
I'm ready. Thank you, Angel.
Awesome. I'm going to pass it over to you then.
Great. I'm glad you're going to monitor chat for me and raise hands, because once I get into my slides, I will not be able to see you guys. So you get a break. I won't ask you for cameras, which I normally do. But Angel and Shayla promised me that this was an interactive group, so I have a whole bunch of information. If we don't get through it all, that is fine by me. If you have questions and this is a productive conversation, that's what is important. Before I jump into my organization, it's especially important for me with this group to go through my personal background. I live in Baltimore, Maryland. I've been in the residential construction world for about 15 years now, but before that, I worked as a consulting engineer. I'm actually a Nebraska native, was born in Lincoln, went to college in Omaha at the Peter Kiewit Institute, have a degree in structural engineering. Also grew up showing horses, and my horse trainer was in Tulsa. So both of these cities have really close ties to my heart. They're both places I've spent a lot of time. I have focused on high wind. We have both a high wind and a hurricane standard. We'll get into that a little bit more, but I've focused on high wind, assuming no one here builds a lot that's coastal. If you do, please drop in a chat so that Angel can let me know so I don't gloss over those as much as I'm tentatively planning to. And as she said, please feel free to make this as interactive as you want. The more this is a conversation, the better it's going to be for all of us. So let me share my screen. And you should all be able to see that. Is that true? Perfect. Yes. So what we're going to talk about today is IBHS and fortified construction. IBHS is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, and that is the organization that I work for. Part of what we have done is we study post-storm damage, and we've done that for over 30 years, identifying common causes of loss, things that when they fail end up causing catastrophic failure. An example of that is garage doors. I have been on damage assessments for the past 10 years following both tornadoes and hurricanes. So we're going to go through first why resilient construction is important, and second, some techniques that are little tweaks as well as the fortified construction standards. So a lot of you might be wondering, why in the world is this Insurance Institute studying storms? We are a group of, we're a nonprofit, our members are insurance companies and reinsurers. And so they want to minimize their risk. And one of the ways that they have done that is built a one-of-a-kind research center. This research center is outside of Charlotte. It's actually in South Carolina, where we test methods and materials for both homes and businesses to make them more resilient. Can you see my mouse, Angel? I can see your face if you want to nod.
Yes, I can see.
Okay, perfect. So this building right here is our test chamber. In that chamber, we can build full-scale houses. And these 105 fans all can power on and blow wind at up to 130 miles an hour at those houses. The houses can spin in circles, the buildings can spin in circles, whatever kind they are. We also can drive rain at that. We can mimic rain in real life storm situations, so up to 8 inches an hour of rain. There are hail cannons along the top of the building. You can drop hail onto the building, and we do wildfire research. I'm not going to talk about wildfire at all today. If we want to, we could talk about that in a future meeting, but I'm going to focus on the wind, the rain, and the hail aspects, and really mostly the wind and the rain aspects in today's conversation. So when you think about natural disasters, there are a lot of types of them. In Iowa, we had the derecho a few years ago, hurricanes, tornadoes for you guys. But since 2015, there have been more than 112, because I know that Hurricane Ian is not included in this number. Losses, severe weather-related losses that had over $1 billion in loss. And that's a huge impact on your community when that happens, especially those underserved communities, because how do we get people back into their homes quickly and safely without really causing even more catastrophic damage? So what we're trying to do are minimize these $1 billion losses as much as we can. And some great places we can do that are in Midwest tornadoes. Hurricanes hit such a large amount. I mean, you can see this hurricane coming in here. It affects so many structures, but those smaller, and a lot of them are still very large events, but tornadoes and thunderstorms and derechos hit fewer homes and affect fewer people, but still can very much be in that $1 billion loss range. So what we're trying to do is really break a cycle of destruction. Anytime you're making any building, there's a series of decisions that need to be made. And those decisions, even if you don't think about it, really determine the resilience of your home. Or by resilience, I mean the capacity for it to resist a significant weather event. So if you make poor decisions at building, it can lead to a continuous cycle where you build or repair something, and then you have an event which causes damage, and then you build or repair it well. And if you don't do it well enough, you're going to end up with another event and more damage. So as people in the construction industry, as building professionals, we can break this cycle of destruction, and we can stop it after the repair. And that's what we want to do. We want to make it so that we really minimize damage, and more importantly, minimize the amount of time that people have to be out of their home following an event before they can get back and start operating again. So just really small little tweaks and investments can have a really significant impact on the performance of a home or building. My other disclaimer for today, and we'll get into it a little bit more, I'm going to focus mostly on homes today, which we define as single family townhomes. We do all of the same tactics work with multifamily houses and commercial structures. For me, I just have to pick one and focus on it, because otherwise I pop back and forth between saying building and home so many times. And so anytime I say home, you can think structure and assume that it's a safe assumption. So what we're trying to really avoid after an event is damage like this. So here we see some post-storm damage. This was a hurricane, but you know, the poor people who owned this house, it's gone. It's not going to do any good. But how can we get people to where they can stay in a home? As an engineer, we talk a lot about resilience and how to help things bounce back. But one of the things that has most shocked me as I have really joined the resilience world, and that is what I do now full time, is resilient construction, is there's no clear cut, or there wasn't until recently, a clear cut definition. Everyone thinks something a little bit different when they hear resilient. The same could have been said for green homes 15 or 20 years ago. Somebody said, your house is green, great. What did that really mean? That is better defined now. Resiliency, we're still working toward one, but there is now a definition that is an industry statement. IBHS is circled on here. Lots of organizations put their name on this definition to try to better have a single definition. And the definition really comes down to the ability to prepare and plan for, absorb, recover from, and successfully adapt to events. So it's not just the planning stage, it's the recovery and the how do we deal with it in the moment. And then how do we, as we move forward and weather continues to change, adapt to continue this process all the way through. So we're going to look at some real world numbers of what a few beyond code tweaks can do. And don't mind me as I pop back and forth. I'm still admitting a few people, which is great. Welcome if you're just joining us. The two types of damage, like I talked about, that we're going to focus on mostly are wind and water intrusion. And when we think about those, they can happen anywhere. This wind event is from a tropical event, but I have seen this same damage in Omaha. I have seen it in Dallas-Fort Worth. I have seen it in Oklahoma City, and I have been on the ground in all of those cities following high wind events. So if you think about this home here, once this roof fails, the home, it can't be lived in, it's catastrophic. Where when we go to the water intrusion slide, a lot of these homes look like they did great. They look like, okay, people can probably live there. But if we pop in and look at this home that you think, okay, yeah, there's some damage, but it's just shingles. Well, there was enough water damage. They had to pull all of their carpet out. So this is all of their carpet sitting in front of their lawn. They're not living in that home. They're having to gut it to dry it out. This is another example from this home where, yeah, you see the blue tarp in the back, but overall from the front, a lot of people, including myself, before I joined the resiliency world, would look at that and think, oh, that's not so bad. Like, I can replace some shingles after a storm. Well, all of this debris in the front tells a different story. That's all water damage. And so that water coming in is, roofs are the single biggest insurance claim, but water damage really prevents that recovery and that moving back in phase. As we build to anything, building code is a minimum standard. So 80% of insurance claims nationally are roof related, and the single largest item is water intrusion. So keep that in mind as we move forward through this, and there will be some little tweaks that'll make a lot of sense to you all of a sudden. So we're going to first dig into Hurricane Sally. Fortified construction is a voluntary construction standard. We're going to dig all the way into it at the end if you guys don't have good questions before then. And it has been primarily used coastally. However, it can be used anywhere. And in Alabama, a number of years ago, there was an insurance crisis where people couldn't get homeowners insurance. And so the insurance industry and the building industry banded together, and a significant portion of the coastal jurisdictions adopted Fortified. And now insurance companies know their risk is reduced because their homes are built to the Fortified standard, and therefore you can get insurance. It also led to Hurricane Sally, which hit the coast in 2020, hitting almost 15,000 designated homes. So this is a real world. These houses were built to the fortified standard, and we had a very slow-moving Category 2 storm. So the gusts were over 130 miles an hour, moving across South Alabama. It moved at 3 to 4 hours. One of these black dots down here is my colleague Alex, and she sat in the center of the storm for 9 hours and had minimal damage. So we're going to look at a little bit of the results from Hurricane Sally. This is our single best test case. And while we never, ever, ever wish storms on anyone, this provided us a really good opportunity to show the real world results that we were seeing. So this is an overhead shot, an aerial shot from Hurricane Sally. These two houses on the outside were not fortified. This one in the middle is. I'm guessing you guys won't be able to hear this. Can you hear him talking?
No, we can't.
Okay, that's all right. I can talk for him. So this is the homeowner of that home in the middle. And not only did he not have any damage, he didn't have a need for tarps, and he met all of his neighbors helping them out by putting tarps on and giving them a place to go where they could be dry and warm and safe. To have a homeowner say, you know, I really saw the value of paying for the extra upfront is huge. A wider view of that same neighborhood. So this is Matt's house here. You can see there are just a number of tarps strewn throughout. And this is in that area where a significant portion are fortified. And you can look again at the debris out front. So there's a bunch of carpet from this house that has a lot of tarping. Being able to stay in your home, it's so incredibly important and something you don't think about up front. This is coastal. So this is along the very coast of Alabama. The yellow house has a fortified gold designation. All the other houses in the picture do not. So every other one has some sort of roof damage, as well as damage to other components. The yellow house, they were just fine and could stay operable day of. And like I said, it's not just houses. We also have a commercial and a multifamily program. The multifamily program just launched at the beginning of 2022. So we did not have any multifamily projects in Alabama when the storm hit. However, it is very similar to the commercial program. So the commercial program would have worked just as well. We had 14 roof designations, 4 silver and 1 gold. Everything from hotels to condos to offices to restaurants, schools. And when you look at buildings, again, these are along the beach. This is a community center. This building was not fortified, and that one was. And so the difference in performance here is noticeable. Even though this one was built to code, they have a lot to do moving forward. And one of the biggest, again, I hesitate to call it a win because we never want to wish a storm on anyone. But one of the biggest successes was the Lodge, which is a hotel in the Gulf State Park, right on the beach. And this hotel stayed completely operable. They, in fact, were able to house a lot of the emergency response team. So they were able to keep their team there, their staff there, and really house a lot of the people who needed to be in town to help. They never closed, and the manager said, we just really became a beacon for the community of there's a place we can go when we need help. So moving on to Hurricane Ida, who hit in September of 2021. These two buildings are only about not quite a half a mile apart, and this hit in Louisiana. They were built by the same company. These were brand new. These are fortified gold. These would now be fortified multifamily. They were fortified commercial at the time because multifamily did not exist. Most of the homeowners or tenants from this building moved into this property because this one was destroyed and this one had minor damage. You see here an HVAC unit. They were still constructing this at the time of the storm. So the HVAC units had been placed on their platforms, which they do for flood prevention, but not yet bolted down. So those went away because they weren't bolted in place. But during construction, that can be expected. Another example is this home, which is on Grand Isle in Louisiana. It is the furthest occupiable land in Louisiana, furthest out into the Gulf. And this house had a backup generator and it had a water system, and the builder housed all of the utility and line workers in it, not all of them, but a significant portion of people, because he had no damage. There was an air conditioner, there was running water. He was able to put people in the next day to help really, and that is the true definition of resilience, help people recover by having a house that stayed there. So I've talked a lot about hurricanes, and I know that we're not hurricane people. I have not seen anybody pop up that says they're a hurricane person yet. So I can't talk about it without talking about tornadoes as well. This is the Moore tornado in 2013, and we are not going to prevent this damage cost effectively. What we can do is prevent a lot of this damage cost effectively. And that is huge. Tornadoes are why I got into structural engineering. Grew up in Tornado Alley. They are, as a structural engineer, my specialty was storm shelters and wood construction. I then worked in the wood construction world and have since then transitioned to the resilient world. So tornadoes, as we talk, I will say hurricane a lot because I have been trained to based on the role that I have, but please know that I also mean tornadoes or thunderstorms. I would venture a bet that every person on this call has had roof damage from a thunderstorm. Just knowing that you live in Omaha and Tulsa primarily, you've had wind damage from a thunderstorm. So what can we do to prevent it? This little video, I'm sad you're not going to be able to hear it, but I will talk through it as it goes. Talks a little bit more about tornadoes.
Does it give you the option to share your computer volume?
I don't see where. Let me pop back.
If not, of course, we would love for you to narrate, but it could possibly when you do your share screen. But
I don't hear it. I'm guessing it's not because of my headset.
Okay.
But I can narrate it almost as well as the voice. So when we talk about tornadoes, we talk about narrowing the path. I said in that last picture, we weren't going to prevent the direct hit of the EF4 or the EF5, but we're not powerless. So that was an example of an EF4 tornado coming through. These pink areas are an EF4 wind speed. Actually, they're EF5. Red is EF4, all the way out to an EF0 in the blue zone. What we can do is really prevent damage in the areas on the shoulders, as we call them, of a tornado. All of that yellow and green and blue, we can minimize the damage. We're not going to prevent all of it. We're never going to be tornado proof. Highly recommend a storm shelter, but little things like rafter ties and stronger garage doors and a sealed roof deck can help withstand those winds better and really prevent damage and keep people in their homes long term. And if we can narrow that path, just look at how many houses we can affect. And here is our disclaimer: no matter how strong your house is, none of us can cost effectively build a house that is also a tornado shelter. Plus, you wouldn't get to have any windows, so that's no fun. Well, you could have windows. They would just be very, very expensive windows. So a storm shelter is recommended, especially if you're in an area like Moore that has been repeatedly hit by tornadoes and doesn't have basements. In Omaha, you typically have a basement stair set you can climb under and be safe. In Moore, there aren't basements, so those storm shelters are very important. Nope, I don't want to play that again. So that's some of the why and some of the history of how the Fortified program has performed. So we're going to jump into some technical details on the program. Before we do that, does anyone have questions, or are there chats that I have missed?
There are none that I can see.
Perfect.
Again, if anybody wants to raise their hand and we can call you for you to ask your question, or feel free to put them in the chat and I will ask on your behalf.
Perfect. So as I've mentioned, we have 3 different programs. We have the Fortified Home program, the Fortified Commercial program, and the Fortified Multifamily program. They're pretty self-explanatory. Fortified Home is duplexes, townhomes, or single-family homes that want to build to a slightly higher standard. Multifamily are other residences, so apartments, condos, that type of building that want to build to a standard, and then commercial is everything else. One of the main differences between the commercial standard and the multifamily standard is the requirement for backup power. That being said, when we are designing, especially again in underserved communities, backup power is always a smart choice, because being able to get someone back online, if it's summer in either Omaha or Tulsa, you don't want to be without power for very long, because you won't be comfortable in your home and you will have the potential for mold growth. So that being said, backup power is always a good idea. For multifamily, it's not a requirement. So what is Fortified? Fortified is a voluntary beyond code program that contractors or builders or developers can participate in. One of the biggest benefits of this program is that it has a third-party verification of the construction. So an additional person comes out and looks that these little tweaks were made to ensure that the home is more resilient. There are two geographically appropriate standards, high wind and hurricane. I've already talked about that a little bit. I do have some hurricane information in these slides. I'm going to gloss over it, either for those of you on the call or anyone who is listening. Feel free to reach out if you ever have questions on coastal, because I am going to gloss over it. But know that it's there. Within each geographically appropriate standard, there are 3 different levels of durability: fortified roof, fortified silver, and fortified gold. Every single fortified home has a fortified roof. That is non-negotiable, so they build on each other. Fortified roof is great for re-roof projects. If you're re-roofing a building, you could potentially put a fortified roof on and not need to, it wouldn't be cost prohibitive at that level. We're going to dig into what each one of those mean a little bit in a second. And this bullet says what I just said. I got ahead of myself, that having the 3 levels allows it to be achievable at any price point, and for both renovations and existing construction as well as new construction. And currently we have over 40,000 homeowners that have fortified certificates nationwide. So that's a lot of families that we've affected, and that is only the fortified home program. When you start looking at the fortified multifamily and commercial, there are a lot bigger events. Really, at its core, what it is that developers get to choose, you guys get to choose materials and techniques that are proven both in our lab and in the real world to better resist high wind events. Not big changes, nice little tweaks. Those components are then required, the components that we require are verified and documented. So there will be a third-party evaluator, we call them, who comes out and makes sure that the components that the plans say are installed, sends that information to IBHS, and we do an internal audit on every single project. Once that audit is complete and we have all the documentation we need, a fortified designation is issued saying that that home or that structure or that building meets the fortified standard. In some places, that can be used. Alabama is one we use as an example. In Alabama, that can be used to get a discount on homeowners insurance. It can likely be used anywhere. Alabama just has so many designations that they have a more informed insurance industry. So it's easier to find agents who know. That doesn't mean we can't find agents to talk to about how to get there in any area. So now we are going to jump into the 3 different levels. Fortified roof is pretty simple. You want to nail down your roof deck, you want to seal it to keep that water out, and then you want to lock it in. And we're going to go into even more detail on all of this. I built the technical stuff down in a little bit so that if you had a bunch of questions, we could stop earlier. Fortified silver then looks at windows, doors, garage doors, a little bit more at exterior walls, attached structures, gable ends. So that is taking it a step further. We're not just looking at the roof, which is the primary failure point in any storm, but we're starting to work down the walls. And then fortified gold adds in a continuous load path. So that is a design that ensures the whole thing is all tied together. Specifically in home, that is not always done as well as you might assume it is by people who are building to the building code. So we're going to dig into even more details on all of those, but that is the super high level overview. So I keep saying designations. Designations stick with the house, so they're transferable between homeowners. You get a certificate from us, and they expire. So that is something that is somewhat unique. A designation is good for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, there is a new evaluation that is a much quicker evaluation, essentially making sure there hasn't been any major renovation or re-roof, or you didn't add a second story to your house to ensure that the home still meets that fortified standard. All of those things can happen, repairs can happen. There just reaches a point you have to involve an evaluator again to make sure that you maintain that designation. This becomes exceptionally important in areas where there is an insurance discount. We spoke to a homeowner the other day who made some changes to her home. She's in Alabama, didn't realize in Alabama, a wind premium can be $3,000 to $5,000. And she lost her designation at the time of redesignation. And so all of a sudden she's losing $1,000 a year in homeowner insurance costs. So communicating this upfront or making sure you're aware of it is exceptionally important. Angel, I'm so glad you have your camera on because I actually can see you and your reactions are giving me life. I don't know how you are this excited after eating a Thanksgiving lunch, but I am proud of you. So benefits to owners. There's peace of mind during a storm. I have been working recently with a homeowner who lives right where Hurricane Ian hit, and she had 155-mile-an-hour winds come through her house, and she knew that her house was designed for 160. And she knew that everything had been looked at, and she said her family was freaking out, and she said, no, we're good. And she is a very knowledgeable homeowner who works for a builder, but there is that peace of mind. There are financial incentives, so credits or insurance premium discounts. Potentially, there's an increase in resale value, especially once the market starts to flip. So in Alabama, a lot of people won't buy a house unless it has a fortified roof. And then, of course, just that increased protection. It's one you don't think of as much, but it's so important to be able to keep people in their home. So there are, before we jump into the 3 different levels, we're going to talk about a few assumptions. Like with any standard, there has to be a base level of if you don't meet this, you don't meet the program. So we're going to talk about some qualifying requirements for the fortified home standard. The first one is foundations. Most of your foundations are going to comply. They can be slab on grade, they can be stem walls, they can be basements, they can be crawl spaces, they can be elevated. What they can't be is dry stack. You can't set a home on top of foundations that are just blocks stacked together. And this seems like you wouldn't have to say it, but we do have to say it because we see them all the time come in. So connecting a home to its foundation is important. Fortified does not have flood recommendations, however, or flood requirements. However, we do recommend if you're in a flood zone, you elevate. And then documentation. So this is where we've talked about that evaluator who comes out and makes sure that the requirements are met. And we have a very specific checklist. This is a short example of them, where one thing we need is 4 elevation photos, 1 from each face of the dwelling. This helps us evaluate the foundation. It helps us make sure that the house we're looking at is the house we're reviewing. Make sure there isn't some big glaring error, or specifically at redesignation, a change, because we will have pictures of each elevation from initial designation. At redesignation, if there is, say, another room added here, we're going to know that.
I have a question, Mary, quickly.
Yeah.
Does this only apply for new construction, or can you rehab a house and get it fortified, certified, or designated?
You can rehab a house for sure. So depending on what is happening in the home, you can easily get to fortified gold, probably fortified silver in high wind, or fortified roof, probably fortified silver in high wind areas. Fortified gold, if you're not taking out most of the drywall, could be a challenge. It is not impossible. It is potentially not cost effective. So this could be either at a time of re-roof. That's where we see a lot of existing homes, is when they're re-roofed, because the roof is all, the way the program is designed, roof is intended to be able to be used on existing homes. So the plan there is you can use it on existing homes.
And then your contractors, do they have to have a special designation in order to be a fortified designated or approved contractor? Or is just making sure that they meet the requirements of whatever the evaluation requires?
So the contractors do not have to be certified. The evaluators do have to be certified. Good evaluators are contractors, code officials, home inspectors. We have national partners that will go anywhere. We also have some Oklahoma evaluators. I believe we have an Iowa evaluator. I don't think we have anybody in Nebraska, but I'm sure I can find somebody that wants to do it. Contractors do not have to be certified. There are training courses they can take. We have an online learning management system. So there are courses they can take to be certified that they can use to market themselves, both for builders and roofers. So if you have one roofer you work with a ton, it might be a good idea to go ahead and get them the roof certification, just so you know that they know what they need to do. But it is not a requirement. Any contractor can do it. This guy who's doing the documentation and the evaluating is the one that we depend on to be certified and know what he's looking at in more detail. So now we are going to really dig into technical stuff. Before we get there, other questions? You guys are not holding up the promise of very interactive that I was given.
I am.
You are. Thank you, Angel.
We do have a question in the chat. For certification, are projects review tested specifically or in this region similar to following code requirements? Or have we kind of, that this is kind of the above code type of deal?
So this is a little bit above code, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Anything that you see that has a little hurricane, as we get into here, I'll make sure I point that out for you, Mike. I do see the chat now. Anything that has a little hurricane near it wouldn't apply for you regionally in a high wind zone. There are only two standards, high wind or hurricane. High wind would be all of the interior of the country. But there is some regional, and then there's a minimum. But if your local, which none of your locals are going to go above the minimum, if your local code, so if you're in Miami, for example, you're going to end up being well above the minimum, even for the hurricane standard, because you have to meet the actual code requirements. Good question. So like I said on roof, the basis of it is nail it, seal it, lock it in with a drip edge, but we're going to dig even more than that. So fortified roof addresses a number of things. It addresses your roof deck, sealing of that roof deck, preventing that water intrusion we talked about, your drip edge, finished roof cover, and then this one should have a little hurricane on it for attic ventilation. You guys don't need to worry about that. And if you have solar panels on the roof, you would need to worry about that. That is not just hurricanes. But really what we're trying to prevent with the roof is both wind damage and that water damage. So we're trying to prevent water seepage and wind-driven rain. Wind-driven rain, a lot of what isn't included in the high wind standard, but is included in the hurricane standard, relates to wind-driven rain. So if you were coastal, you would have to have on your attic vents, there would have to be either removable covers or they would have to be rated for wind-driven rain. But because in a high wind area or in a tornado area where we all live, you're not going to have warning to go put a gable end vent cover on before a thunderstorm hits. That's not real life. So we don't require them. We're also not going to sit in the middle of a Category 3 hurricane for 9 hours. Our thunderstorms are going to go by a little bit more quickly and it's going to be less water. So the goal with fortified roof is really we want to keep the lid on the house. And keeping the lid on really helps prevent further catastrophic damage. This slide's in a weird spot, but we'll talk about it. You can use any type of roof cover. So it could be asphalt shingles, metal panels, clay or concrete. I am focusing on asphalt shingles today because, again, I'm making the assumption that that is the majority of what you see. But know that just because I'm only going to talk about shingles, it doesn't mean that you can't use any kind of roof cover at all. It just has to be properly qualified and rated. And if you want to do a weird roof cover, or if you're building something that has low slope roofs, which we often see in multifamily and commercial, those exist too and work. So the first thing is your roof deck. Your roof deck needs to be a thickness that works. That is one area that it is code dependent. Depending on which version of the code you use, it could be either 7/16 or 15/32. If your roof deck is existing and is 7/16, that is fine. What we want to do is nail it in with ring shank nails. And we have a slightly tighter nailing pattern than code minimum. So in high wind areas, it would be 6 inches on center with a minimum 1 5/8 of penetration of those nails. What that does is these little rings on this nail make it immensely harder to pull that nail out of the stud that it's attached to. As much as 2 times as much resistance comes from nailing with ring shank nails as nailing with smooth shank nails. So that little tiny tweak right away prevents whole panels from flying off your roof during a tornado, which prevents water from getting in, which keeps your homeowners in the houses. So that's all of this. Eventually, every single one of these I can tie back to this is why we do it. And we do it to keep the homeowners in the houses. We have all sorts of weird requirements. If you have existing decking, but there are a bunch of gaps, we have details that your contractors can use to cover those gaps and meet the fortified standards. So we have tried very hard to address, to go to your point, Angel, if you're renovating something, to prevent you from having to tear a bunch of stuff off. We have a lot of details about how we do this. So once you have your roof deck correct and your roof sheathing correct, we want to seal our roof deck. So a sealed roof deck can prevent water intrusion by more than 90%, which is huge. If we go back to this slide and we look at this pile of carpet, how do we, if we had 90% less water, would this carpet be? How is that sealed roof decks work? A sealed roof deck is a system that is applied to seal all of the seams in the sheathing. This can be, we have a lot of different ways to meet this. I'm not going to dive too deep into the different options, but there are multiple options to do this. And next, I'm going to show you a video from inside our test chamber at our lab in South Carolina of a duplex built side by side. One half has a sealed roof deck and one half does not. We're going to watch this test. It is sped up. You'll see the house spin. You don't watch the whole thing because it turns out it's very boring. Good question, Mike. It turns out I will get to that. Turns out it's very boring to watch a test at real speed. It's not as imagined or as crazy as you would think, but this video is going to be great. Mike asked, do certified inspectors need to inspect every step of the way? There are documentation requirements every step of the way. Once you have a relationship with an evaluator, and we recommend involving an evaluator as soon as possible, you or the roofer can help gather some of those photos. They do need to visit the job site a couple of times, but there are a lot of steps where an owner or the roofer or the contractor can help gather the photos. And it's just really important. It's that coordination that's such a challenge for all of us, but getting your contractors involved, no, they do not need to be on site 100% of the time, which helps make it more cost effective. So here we go on this video. This is in the lab. The fans are back here on this side. And so we're blowing wind on this, seeing the roof start to fail. First thing we lose is shingles. And then we lose the underlayment and start to see the underlayment rip. Here you see the house spinning. So we're not just blowing wind on one side of the house, we're blowing it all the way around the house. Here the rain is coming in, blowing from the fans. You can see all this water blowing at this house. If 60% of the rain, which is falling in this test at 8 inches per hour, gets into the house, it fills 7 bathtubs with water. So here you can see all these drips coming in. This is the unsealed roof deck side. And you think, it's just shingles. And it is just shingles until that rain starts coming in. So continuing to watch this test, this is why I say it can get very boring. We have cameras everywhere in this house. This is one half of the duplex following the test. You can see that water caused the ceiling to fail, insulation everywhere, just completely saturated. This is the other half. Exact same duplex built all the way. You do see some insulation down here. That is actually from them lifting the attic hatch to look at what it looked like up there. It fell out when they did that. But that really shows the impact, right, of that little tweak of how do we keep water out?
As a realtor, that looks like a nightmare.
Right?
Like a scary movie.
It is a scary movie. Oh man, don't jump on me. So this is a side-by-side of the sealed roof deck living room versus the non-sealed roof deck living room. It does not want to stay on that slide for me. Crazy, right? So we had an actual adjuster come into the lab to look at the difference. On the sealed roof deck side, the damage estimate was $6,000. On the unsealed side, $19,000. Now those numbers are adjusted for inflation and they're more accurate today numbers. So that's not what the actual piece of paper the adjuster wrote would say. But that tape, that's the only difference in how these houses were put together, saved $13,000 on this pretty small house. It's a big deal. So sealed, I do not have an exact cost on the tape there. It is not that expensive. Mike asked in the chat, do we have a cost on the tape? You would need to look at the whole system. There are a lot of different ways you can get to a sealed roof deck. You can get there through either taping the seams and then using an improved underlayment with approved installation of that underlayment. You can actually get there without the tape by doing 2 layers of 30-pound felt. And again, we have a detail that goes into that information. You can also get there by doing a self-adhered membrane over the whole roof deck. So that's essentially one self-adhered over the whole thing. For an average roof, you're not going to spend more than $1,000 for a 2,000 square foot house, $1,000 to $1,200 in construction materials to do everything. That's the tape, that's the drip edge, that's the approved shingles. They're just really little tweaks. I don't have single costs on any one item, but it is, especially at the roof level, not cost prohibitive. Sealed roof deck has proven to be so successful that in the 2021 International Residential Code, it is a requirement in high wind areas or in hurricane areas. You guys don't have it in your codes yet. That doesn't mean it won't be there. It's just proven time and again to help with that recovery. So the next thing we're going to do, so far we've put on the right roof deck, the right sheathing thickness, we've nailed it appropriately. Now we've sealed the roof deck. The next thing we're going to do is put on a drip edge and install it appropriately. So a drip edge holds that sealed roof deck in place. It locks the whole system together. So it holds that in place and it serves as an anchor point for the roof cover. It gives that roof cover a good solid thing to grab to, because when you saw it failing in that video, it starts at the edges and peels away. And so having an appropriately installed drip edge helps prevent that failure. It is required in the IRC. It's often not enforced and they're often misinstalled. So here's my first example of the little blue hurricane versus the little green high wind. You guys get to think about the high wind standard. So for high wind, essentially we want the drip edge that comes over the underlayment, over that sealed roof deck. These nails would be at 12 inches on center, appropriate overlaps, and then we have a 2-inch minimum. But it's a pretty simple, your drip edge is required already, just install it correctly and your evaluator or your roofer will take pictures, send them to your evaluator and your evaluator can double check when they come out. We also have a requirement for flashing. When we re-roof, let's install new flashing. Let's really work on minimizing the moisture damage and the ways that moisture can get into that house. So your house or building has to be properly flashed, properly put together. So it is required by code that you flash. That doesn't mean it always happens. So we go ahead and add it into the standard because it should. And then I said I was going to talk mostly about shingles. With asphalt shingles, you just have to meet one of two acceptable classifications. They are very easy to find. You can walk into any big box store and buy a shingle that meets either ASTM D3161 Class F or 7158 Class H. You do not need to know those numbers. They are written in the standard, and that is not important for you guys, just knowing that the shingles have to show they meet that standard. And one of the things that the evaluator documents is the packaging of the shingles, so that they would have taken a picture of this package of shingles so that we can see that what's going on the roof meets the standards. I talked about the drip edge being something that was used to start your shingles. So your starter strips let me go back one, at your edges, and of course I don't have any edges at these edges, tie that first layer of shingles down to the roof. And so by tying that first layer down, you prevent that big peeling failure. And there are two ways to do that. You can use a peel and stick adhesive starter strip, or we have a mastic option, essentially just making sure that that first shingle is really tied down. This is where I thought I was going to talk about acceptable roof covers, but had one slide in the wrong order for you. The main difference between asphalt shingles and any other roof is with asphalt shingles, we have the two standards that you must meet. With other roofs, you have to have a design pressure rated roof cover. So you'll need to work with your roofer to get the appropriate testing report that shows that it's pressure rated. Here's an area that we've talked about a little bit, and I'm going to buzz right through it because this is hurricane only. But during a hurricane, if this vent is inadequately covered or inadequately installed, that water intrusion can be drastic. So in a hurricane, there are requirements for vents. We're going to buzz right past them because it doesn't matter to us. I have not seen anyone yet pipe up that they care. So we're going to keep assuming that's the case. So that gets us through roof, and that is really the hard one. The others are even smaller tweaks, at times more costly, but smaller tweaks. If you put a fortified roof on your house, you're going to prevent a significant amount of damage and get people back in their homes a lot more quickly. So next, we're going to talk about silver and gold. Silver and gold really focus more on damage amplifiers. And what a damage amplifier is it's a part of your building that when it fails, it puts additional stresses and strain on the rest of the building and often leads to catastrophic failures. They include things like gable ends. Garage doors is number one, the biggest one that I see. But gable ends and garage doors are both damage amplifiers. And you can see with silver, those are the things we focus on. We focus on windows and doors, specifically garage doors, windows and doors more for hurricane. And gable end bracing has a ton of requirements, not a ton, has more requirements in silver, as well as overhang, soffits, and attached structures. And what we think about with all of these and why they're damage amplifiers, you're going to have to bear with me being extremely nerdy here for a minute, is the way that wind blows on a building and the way that it works. And when wind blows on a building, we assume the wind goes out around the building and doesn't go inside. Well, if your garage door fails, you have a sudden internal pressurization. And it's like you're blowing your house up like you blew a balloon up too big. Because all of a sudden, not only do you have wind blowing on the outside of your house, but you have wind blowing on the inside of your house too. And it makes it easy for the roof to fly off or the walls to fall out. We see that failure again and again. And here is a little image of that. So once this window or door or garage door fails, the wind coming in is pushing as well as the wind pulling on the outsides of the building. And it can lead to significant catastrophic failure. That significant catastrophic failure then becomes airborne debris, windborne debris that can do the same thing to your neighbor's house. Take out your neighbor's garage door, cause them to have a damage amplifier and a catastrophic failure. So our research has proved time and again, this is a side by side, and I didn't put this video in because it's longer, of a fortified home versus standard construction. So we can use that research to lead to better codes and improved standards, which we've done, inform best practices and installation guidelines, which I'm doing, and then really empower developers and you guys, developers and contractors, to have better finished products. It's not just, you know, we want the manufacturers to create better finished products, and we want the building community to create better finished products. So continuing to step through requirements, this one should have a little hurricane on it, it doesn't. In hurricanes, you have to either have impact rated structures or shutters. Again, we don't require this in high winds, because when a tornado comes through, you're not going to be able to go out and put shutters on all of your windows quickly. But when a hurricane comes through, people have days of preparation time typically. Garage doors, we've talked about this one a lot. Garage doors in more recent codes are required to be pressure rated. They are so often not enforced and not looked at. So by installing a pressure rated garage door, which is minimally more expensive, I talked to a supplier in Kentucky the other day that thought the cost for a exceptionally large door would be about $1,000 to put in a appropriately pressure rated garage door in an area where they're not shipped. Preventing this damage, though, is such a huge thing, and it makes such a big difference. And then in areas, so Kentucky is looking at the fortified program because of their recent tornadoes. And so once they have a few builders who are shipping doors in more regularly, that cost will come down, right? As we think about the supply chain and how everything works, right now it's a special order. If there are 5 builders building fortified homes who are using the garage doors regularly, they're not going to have to pay that extra shipping fee. So the cost, that's part of what makes cost such a hard question for me to answer. The next thing involved in fortified silver is chimneys. Chimneys just need to be properly framed. We have details for it. What we don't want is a chimney to blow off. We think back to that water intrusion, all of a sudden you have a big hole in the roof. Not only do you have a spot for wind to get in, but water intrusion. And we have simple details. So here, if you were doing a retrofit, we have a detail. I'm not going to dig all the way into it because it is not that complicated, but I get nerdy quickly. So if it's less than 5 feet, you can just add a little bit of extra framing, a couple of hangers, and be good. The next thing we're going to talk about, and we're going to dig into them a little bit, are gable ends. Gable ends are the triangle sides of a roof. And there are 2 ways that people can build gable ends in the real world. They can run a stud all the way from the foundation to the roof. And if they do that, we're in good shape. Or much more commonly, all across the nation, they're built by building 4 square walls, and then the roof sits down on top of it, and you have this triangle piece. Well, what that does is it creates a spot where at the bottom of that triangle where the wall can hinge and bend. And so if you have this platform framing, there's a little bit of additional requirement for bracing to make sure that when the wind blows on this wall, there is something to resist that hinge. That is for anything over 3 feet. So if you have a nice short gable, that hinge, it's going to be harder for it to move because you just have that top that can only wiggle a little, or if it's really tall, it can wiggle a lot. So anything over 3 feet will require bracing. There are some details in the existing building code of how to go in and put that bracing in. The next requirement is sheathing. All too often, we see that those triangle pieces aren't sheathed. They don't have anything structural to prevent a piece of flying debris or a piece of windborne debris to go through them. If windborne debris goes through your gable end, all of a sudden you have that internal pressure that wants to blow your roof up off your house. Doesn't do any good to have a sealed roof deck if it leaves your home. These are those bracing details. So here, there are just a couple of different ways that you can brace that gable end. And then if you were in hurricane, overhangs would matter and the size of overhangs would matter. They don't matter for high winds. They do matter and should be properly framed, but we don't see that as the failure point in high winds as much. Same thing with soffits. There are more requirements for soffits in hurricanes. In high wind, we don't see that as commonly as a failure point. So the requirements aren't there. We also have less wind-driven rain concern. And then attached structures. So if you have a carport or a porch or something along those lines that's added in for fortified silver, there has to be some specific load path connectors that need to be there. We need to make sure we tie a roof to a beam. Any beams need to tie to any column. Columns need to tie to foundations. And then if it's multiple story, you need to tie the 2 stories together. This all feels like common sense to us, but there are a lot of times, especially with attached structures, where when the wind comes in, it does come under and it wants to pick up. And so those load paths aren't always designed for that upward force. People think the gravity will hold the carport down, and that's not necessarily true. And they're another huge damage amplifier. So here are 2 examples of a screened-in porch attached structure or a really big 2-level porch attached structure. The good news is we have some prescriptive methods for this. So for your contractors, as long as your attached structure fits within a box and they know your wind speed, they know how big the overhangs are, we have some guidance to try to make this as easy as possible and as accessible as possible for everyone. So that takes us through silver. So now we've talked about the roof, we nail it down, we seal it, we lock the edge in. We've talked about silver, we've talked about your garage doors, gable end bracing, chimneys, and attached structures are the big ones. Next thing we're going to jump into is gold. And gold seems like it should be the hard one. In reality, gold's the easy one because it only has, for high wind, 1 requirement, and that's the continuous load path. And what that does is tie your whole house together. I'm going to show you another video of another test in the chamber that shows why a load path is important. Oh, is this not a video? Dang it, that is not a video. I meant to put the video in there. But on this house, you can see the weak link in the chain was between the top of that wall and the roof. And so this portion of the load path failed, which led to that whole roof came off as one piece and flew out the door. So crazy, little tweaks, a few more hangers, and that can make a big difference. So within fortified gold, overall, what are addressed are design pressured openings. So that's hurricane only. Exterior structural sheathing, again, that's hurricane only, and Oklahoma and Nebraska both design with it most of the time anyway, and then continuous load path. So I'm going to buzz through these hurricane slides, and a continuous load path really comes down to the concept of any chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and that's the same thing for any building. You can put the very best roof on a building, and if you forget to tie that roof to the wall, that's a problem. You can put the very best walls on the building, and if you forget to tie those walls to the foundation, that's a problem. And unfortunately, we see all of those failures. I once walked a house following the Boxing Day tornadoes in Dallas in 2015, where the house had literally just been set down on a slab on grade. There was nothing connecting the framing of the house, the wood of the house, to the concrete. And I was able to walk the whole perimeter of that foundation and saw nothing. And you think about that poor family who had literally nothing to come home to. They had hardwood floor on a slab, and that's all. And so every piece of the chain is really important, and a continuous load path is required by gold. It is often not appropriately enforced or designed. So fortified helps you really get there. The wall sheathing is hurricane only, though highly recommended. And we have a good continuous load path video. This one is a video. So here we'll talk about the load path as we go all the way through. And if we take the house down to its structure, what we want to do is tie everything together. Usually it's done with properly using your wood sheathing and a few extra metal connectors, but there are lots of ways you can get there. So we talked about all these connections we want to tie together. We want to tie the roof to the walls. We have a first floor and a second floor, tie those together, and then tie everything to the foundation. So now working from the bottom up, we want to have some sort of a sill plate to foundation connector, something that ties the wood to the concrete. You are putting anchor bolts in anyway, probably. They are supposed to be going in. We just make sure they do. Upper to lower wall connections, you can use metal straps. You can also use plywood or OSB and span it over this connection area and just put in a couple of extra nails. It's just a tweak to the construction method. Some sort of connection for the studs to the top plates. Again, this can be your wall sheathing. It's possible to use that. And then tying your roof to those top plates. And that happens almost everywhere anyway. So that is really not an extra cost. We just do the verification. And then of course, putting your sheathing on to resist the wind loads and really make the whole house work as a system. And that's one of the things that's super important, is thinking about your house or your building as a system. How do we make it all work as one? And if you have a continuous load path, when the wind blows, yeah, you might get some shaking and some wiggling. That's normal. We want some of that. But what you're going to do is keep everything together. And that's what's really important. So this is just an overall image. This is where it becomes really challenging in existing homes. It's not impossible. An engineer can go in and design a continuous load path. The easiest path to do a continuous load path as an engineer, there is a prescriptive method. So there is an option for, if you have an architect that you work with, for them to go in and do that load path design in high wind areas. They can't do it in hurricane areas, but the option is there. So that gets us through gold. Questions? Have I completely overwhelmed you and put everyone to sleep? Yes, Mike asked if Zipboard is a certified sheathing product if installed correctly. Yes. Zip is a trade name for an OSB that has an applied water resistive barrier. It is made by Huber Engineered Woods. It counts as both your sheathing, because it is wood structural panel and it meets the wood structural panel product standard, which is US Voluntary Product Standard 2. It also has an acceptance criteria for water protection. So if you are using Zip on your roof and you use the Zip tape on the seams, that counts as your sealed roof deck as well. So that is a good, if you're already using Zip on your roof, you have sealed roof deck. Another question, to what extent are contractors familiar with Fortified? That just really varies contractor to contractor. We have a ton of great tools on our website. We also, thank you for that transition, have an online training that they can take. And that's my job. I am here to help you guys, and I am here to work with your contractors and help them understand what they need to do. Nothing that we talked about for general contractors is that off the chart. They just need to make sure they're buying the right materials, making the little tweaks. Mike had the question, how do we best calculate potential savings and credits for your region? That one is a little bit more complicated, and because they won't be as established at the start, it's sort of like the supply chain issue where they're going to, it'll be harder to have people understand early on. Follow up to that is the potential savings difference between roof, silver, and gold. And again, that comes down to educating the insurance companies and the whole market. I mean, really, we have to educate everyone. We have to educate the realtors so they know how to resell a house. We have to educate the builders, the developers, the engineers, the architects, the contractors, the insurance industry. There is a huge education, and we are a team of people who do education out there to get everyone to understand the difference an example on potential cost savings between roof, silver, and gold is that in Alabama, this is not the best or the easiest way to go about it, but in Alabama, the savings are legislated. So it's a state that I can give you specific numbers. Now, we do not want to mandate this anywhere. It's a voluntary program. Just saying that up front, because as soon as you start saying mandate, people freak out. But in Alabama, for roof, you can get between a 25 and 35% discount on your wind premium. Their wind premiums are separate from the rest of their homeowners insurance. So 25 to 35% for roof, 35 to 45 for silver, and 45 to 55 for gold is what is mandated in Alabama. So that's a big impact. It's a big impact, and as we continue to do that education, we can drive that impact everywhere. I'm going to get through my slides and then pop back to questions, but I love all of the questions. Keep typing them and I will pop back to them. So like I said, we have some online training. For the contractors, we have a couple of free sessions. So we have some really good fundamental sessions and previews that if you either want to dig back, you can. These are at fortifiedwise.com, a fundamental lesson and then a training preview. We also, I need to update this slide, we have tests and more in-depth sessions for evaluators. Those are those third-party groups, roofing contractors, and we now have professionals, which would be your general contractors or your designers, anyone who does. Really the difference between roofing contractors and professionals is professionals work with the whole structure. Roofing contractors put on roofs, so they don't need to know about the walls and the garage doors because that's not part of their business. And now we are at the last slide. And I see that I have a question about, or a comment. Thank you for saying it's a good session. You can very easily build without a basement in Omaha and do it safely. For tornado risk, you would want to consider a shelter. I'm less concerned in Omaha than I would be in Oklahoma City, but you can easily tie to that foundation and have it work really well. Thank you for the link there, Angel. That is to one of our websites. I will also type my email address in here because I failed to put it on. It's a holiday week for sure. I failed to put my email address on my closing slide, so I apologize about that. The biggest thing that I want you to take out of this is A, the importance of resilient construction and how the little tweaks can make such a big difference. But B, I'm here to help and we're here to help. We are funded by the insurance industry to reduce risk nationwide because they see that homes can be built better and we can do a little bit better and we can get people back in quickly after a storm. And they pay me to help you and everyone on your food chain from the very beginning to the very end of a project get it right.
So Mary, are these guidelines free? Does it cost a membership to charge?
No, they are
on a listserv. How do we make sure that we can start getting accustomed to the standards and then communicating that and putting it into our normal day?
That is an excellent question. They are completely free on our website, which is fortifiedhome.org. Let's see if I can get it built up. Mike asked, is there a typical cost to evaluate projects or homes? That's another one. I feel like I'm giving you the same answer, Mike, and it's not, I'm not trying to push off and say no. It's going to cost a little bit more if you have to get an evaluator up to speed. Using Alabama again as an example, a roof can cost anywhere from $500 to $700. Gold can get up to $1,000. There's also, though, if you're working with an evaluator who knows that you have good information, that helps. Can you guys still see my screen? Are you seeing a website or my PowerPoint?
Website. We see your website.
Perfect. So on our website, there's all sorts of good information, everything from very in beginning, what is Fortified, frequently asked questions, to all of the technical resources are completely free in professional resources, residential technical resources. So we have the standard, which goes into, it is 100 pages or so, but goes into everything I talked about can be found in here. So if we want to know, how to seal a roof deck. Here we can talk about what that looks like. This is great for your contractors, completely free, shows them the details of what they need to do. We also have the checklist, which helps show exactly which pictures need to be taken. So if we're looking at a new roof, we need to make sure we have 4 elevation pictures from each dwelling and that your foundation is okay. And then look at your roof structural members. So it really lays it out very clearly for anybody to be able to use it. And this can get, I can lose you in all of this. We try to make sure we have everything, but it is all free. It's all on the website for anybody to grab at any point.
Now, if a roofer was to get certified, fortified certified, would they then be able to increase their pricing and so forth because they're in a elite group of individuals that know,
Often they can.
Mm-hmm.
Often they can, the roofers or the professionals. We have a listing of all of our professionals. So that's evaluators, roofers, and professionals. But anyone who is certified in the program can be found. So let's look at Oklahoma. And we'll find a provider. And you can see here there are a number of Oklahoma roofers. There are some professionals. There are a couple of evaluators. So you guys have a really good network already. There has been a good push in Oklahoma in the past. In Nebraska, it's not as big. So here, and when you look at the map, you see most of them aren't actually in Nebraska. They just say they'll go there. So Pilot is our national evaluator contact. So they will do evaluations anywhere. We are happy to help train people. And yes, especially once that goes back to the education and the homeowners, once a homeowner recognizes the value and the real estate market recognizes the value, yes, a roofer can definitely upsell it. Unfortunately, nationwide, roofers don't have the best reputation. And therefore, at times, people just think they're trying to upsell and not that it's actually a useful tool.
Can you speak towards how many insurance companies are familiar with Fortified and who actually maybe acknowledge a discount on insurance costs or whatnot?
A couple of our biggest supporters are State Farm and USAA. So to have names like that recognize it, everyone has some knowledge. There is a challenge getting the information from the people at, well, we'll use State Farm as an example, and they have submitted rates in, I think, all 48 states or a lot of them for discounts. So there are discounts, but getting that information from State Farm up here who come to the IBHS meeting down to the agents who you can walk into their office. So that goes back to, we have a long-term education process in every new market we go to. And we are happy to keep working on that. And if you guys can find excuses for me to fly to Nebraska or Oklahoma, you would make me so happy. My whole family is in Nebraska. I miss
Nebraska needs it.
Yes. And it is coming. That is part of, so I've been with IBHS. I've been on the team since March. I've worked with the team for a lot longer than that. But part of why they brought me in was to move both up the coast and into the plains, because it is a need and the program is growing so quickly now that it is, you guys are listed in my goals as help Fortified move into the Great Plains.
Well, we welcome you because it is heartache when individuals have to go through something catastrophic that seems just so out of our hands, but if we actually put in the preventive measures, it's more of a proactivity versus reaction.
Yep.
And people, especially if they're building new construction, won't even see it because they're consuming it right away. But if something were to happen, they would definitely see the positive effects of having a fortified home.
Yeah, for sure. One of my most impactful damage assessments ever was with my last company. I came and looked at the 2016, I believe, tornadoes that went through Bellevue. And it was College World Series week. And for those of you that aren't in Omaha, College World Series week, you can't get a hotel room. It's not a thing. You can't get a rental car. And so this tornado happened the first day of College World Series. And my boss called and he said, so do you want to go home and look at some tornado damage? And I said, yeah, sure. But I was sleeping in my niece's princess bedroom. And this tornado hit at 8:30 p.m. And one of the houses I looked at was brand new, had been purchased, had been closed on that day. And the entire second story was gone. And if that had been my sister's house, my niece would not have lived.
Which house that was. I
And
know exactly. Mhm.
There's something really strong about seeing that house and then going and climbing into your 4-year-old niece's princess bed and thinking, okay, we can do better for every family. Like I'm really thankful that my sister is safe and my family is safe, but we can do better for everyone.
I had a question, Mary.
Yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate the information that you've provided here about construction in Tulsa or Oklahoma, especially as it relates to wind. I'm curious to know, is there any potential benefit at all by following these guidelines as it relates to potential earthquake hazard?
There is potential benefit. A lot of earthquake is not a hazard that IBHS studies, but wind and earthquake put a lot of the same loads onto buildings. So that a lot of the benefits will be similar, not exact, but yes, a lot of these will have a big impact on your earthquake loads as well in Oklahoma. I should have mentioned that, but there will be some benefit there as well as we have a hail. The other thing I didn't go into and is there is a hail option as well, which essentially just puts on, so we'll go right into the standard. There's a hail supplement. So if you're already meeting fortified, you can put in hail. Essentially what it means is your asphalt shingles need to meet a certain impact resistance, and that comes from testing that we've done in the lab.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I am judging every building I've been in for the last, wondering if this will withstand the winds and, or even new construction, about how quickly it goes up, and if there's any precaution there, if they're even thinking above precaution, because new construction was just expensive for such a long time because of high lumber costs and so forth. And in the meantime, could we have integrated some best practices that are just above code in order to reassure the longevity of these homes? So lots of great information.
I will say that time and time again in storms, including in Hurricane Ian, we find that modern codes work pretty well. Overall, they work really well. The problem areas are enforcement and adoption of modern codes. And those two things often don't happen. But time and again, when we go out and look at damage, what we find aren't failures because the code didn't perform. They're failures either because the code wasn't enforced or things weren't installed properly. That house in Dallas definitely should have had anchor bolts. It did not meet code, and that step just got missed. The house in Nebraska, the second story failure was a garage door was breached, and it was a catastrophic failure. The garage door went first. So neither of those were someone intentionally doing wrong. They both were just from these little things we've studied that we find time and again are missed. And that, for me, that's the biggest part of the fortified standard, is the verification and the documentation, because it is so important to have a set of eyes thinking in that way. And it really reduces the risk so significantly.
Well, this has been so helpful.
May I ask one last question?
Absolutely. I am yours for the next 30 minutes.
Okay, I will try not to nerd out on you. You have to be careful what you ask for. So I have a number of friends who are interested in all kinds of light on the earth types of construction, you know, everything from straw bale to ram to earth. And my own beloved loves the idea of building something like a geodesic dome. Is there a resource for resiliency for any of those other non-traditional types of structures that you might recommend, or do you all do any research into that type of structure?
You are asking the best questions. All the things I forgot to talk about. A lot of what I talked about was wood construction, because that is, I focused on the housing standard, and that is what most of the homes in the country are built out of. We are material agnostic. If you can get an engineer to build any kind of house and tell us that it works, we can't as quickly evaluate it or give you the hard and fast rules on any of those, but we don't care what the structure is. So yes, we can be your resource no matter what building you're doing. You'll just have to have an engineer involved, because there's no prescriptive standard for those buildings that are out of the normal, out of the, that are different materials.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and I will definitely look into some of those sorts of things. As I said, my beloved is completely enamored with geodesic domes, and so I can now go back home and tell him with a straight face that I asked you about that. So
that is perfect.
Franchelle is on the call, and she is my witness.
That is perfect. I have one of those myself who always wants to come up with something creative that we should do as our next thing, and I find myself also asking questions. I'm like, is he losing his mind a little bit, or is this a real option?
Anyone else? Any other questions for Mary? I think people are just taking it all in.
It is a lot
Those
of
are some
information.
Great visuals.
It's a lot of information, for sure. And we have it's easy to get very down into the weeds. So I tried to stay relatively high level. But the number one thing, don't hesitate to reach out. Email address is muher@ibhs.org. Shoot me an email at any time. There are links on the website for send in a question. Those will come to some member of our team. We are here to help.
That's awesome. Well, I don't want to prohibit you all to get started on your Thanksgiving week. I'm not quite sure who's all working tomorrow, but if there's any other questions, Mary, any other last words before we dismiss for today?
No, thank you so much for the time. I look forward to working with all of you in the future, and just I'm excited that this is continuing to grow, and super excited that it's coming into the Midwest, because like I said, tornadoes I've lived them and
need it.
observed them, and we need it. So, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you, everyone else. Have a wonderful holiday the rest of this week, and we will see you all next year. I don't think we currently have a deep dive schedule for December, but we will get this recording out to everyone that attended, and then get something on the schedule for next year. So thank you again. Remember Mary's information. Mary, you were superb. Thank you. I don't know how you
very
do
much.
all of this, so we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.